The U.S. Navy's workhorse warships, Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, and Ticonderoga-class cruisers can sail into the fight with enough long-range firepower to reshape entire battle spaces. But despite the incredible punch these vessels pack, America would struggle to keep them armed throughout a prolonged conflict, with each vessel forced to return to friendly ports for rearming as they expended their onboard missiles. If the Navy's warships were service rifles, it's the equivalent of deploying to the fight with only a single magazine, and then having to fly back to the US every time you ran out of ammo. It may not be a big problem in times of relative peace, but in the event of large-scale war, it becomes a massive strategic vulnerability. But the Navy has a plan to solve this problem. Let's talk about rearming America's warships at sea. I'm Alex Hollings, and it's about time we talked about some sea power. Today's video is sponsored by Ground News, an invaluable tool for staying on top of what's going on around the world and for poking a hole in the political bias that so often skews media coverage. Ground News is an aggregator that compiles news coverage from outlets all around the world and combines them into a single easy-to-read feed. For every story you find on Ground News, they'll give you a brief summary of the topic and make it very easy to compare headlines from different news outlets depending on their political affiliation. You can even use the location feature to see which countries are and aren't covering a story. And when you drill down toward individual outlets, it'll let you know their factuality rating based on the conclusions drawn by 3 independent news monitoring organizations and even who owns the outlet itself. Here's one example. Earlier this week, it was reported that President Biden is close to approving an $18 billion sale of F-15EX fighters to Israel. And right over here in the coverage details, I can see that 35 news outlets have already covered the story, including just 3 left-leaning outlets and 7 right-leaning ones. And by scrolling down to the bias distribution of this story, I can see that that means this coverage is a bit of a blind spot for left-leaning outlets. And these blind spots really matter. Bias in news coverage isn't just about how stories are presented, it's also about which stories outlets choose to cover. Ground News's blind spot feature gives you a list of stories that are getting a great deal of coverage only in one political sphere, allowing us to better understand how our worldviews are being shaped by the media that we consume. I don't just use Ground News for research, it's my first stop every morning, and it can be yours too for a great deal. Just go to ground.news/sandboxx to get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use, or you can try it for just $1 a month. That's less than the cost of a cup of coffee. Again, just go to ground.news/sandboxx with 2 X's or follow the link in the description below so you can make Ground News part of your day as well. Unlike in years past, where even the massive 16-inch Mark 7 naval guns on America's Iowa-class battleships could be replenished at sea while underway, America's modern warships heavily rely on longer-ranged missiles that can't currently be rearmed while at sea. So while these vessels can now engage a much wider variety of targets and from significantly further away, each vessel must now depart the battle space and sail all the way back to a friendly port in order to be rearmed. And this problem is a lot bigger than you might think. A 2019 study conducted by the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments estimates that the U.S. Navy Pacific Fleet would likely expend 360 vertical launch system cells, or missiles, per day. That's more than 10,800 per month if a large-scale fight were to break out in the Pacific, or at least they would if they could be rearmed rapidly enough to sustain those combat operations. But in reality, each destroyer or cruiser would currently need to launch all their weapons and then sail out of the battle space, all the way back to a friendly port, potentially weeks away, to be rearmed before turning around and sailing all the way back. But before we talk about plans to solve this problem, let's talk about how we got here in the first place. The Navy's modern underdeck missile modules provided a massive leap in combat capability over previous deck-borne weapon systems when they first entered service, combining 360-degree hemispherical firepower, or the ability to fire in any direction, with a wide array of weapons housed in standard modular containers. As a result, ships can be equipped with different combinations of weapons depending on mission set, and even more importantly, can be equipped with new weapons as they emerge without the need for ship refits. The centerpiece of the US Navy's long-range fires and air defense capabilities comes in the form of the Lockheed Martin-sourced Mark 41 Vertical Launch System, or VLS, which is made up of one or more 8-cell modules that can be installed in 13 different configurations in warships of varying sizes to provide anywhere from a single module with 8 weapon cells to a combination of 16 modules for a total of 122 cells. These modules come in 2 different sizes. There's the taller 25-foot strike module that's capable of accommodating just about every missile modern US warships leverage, and then the slightly smaller 22-foot tactical module that can carry nearly all VLS-launched weapons, with the notable exceptions of the larger ones, like long-range Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles or ballistic missile interceptors. Now, each of those VLS cells houses a single BAE Systems-sourced watertight canister that can accommodate surface-to-air, anti-ship, anti-submarine, and land attack weapons, with most of these missiles housed one per cell, but there are some smaller weapons, like the evolved Sea Sparrow missile, that can be loaded 4 to a single cell. Thanks to these systems, one Ticonderoga-class cruiser or Arleigh Burke-class destroyer can fill a wide variety of combat and peacekeeping roles depending on the types and mix of weapons carried on board. Now, there are several different classes of weapons that can be housed within these cells, and I'm going to run through most of the common ones and what they're used for, but it is worth noting that because these weapons are transferred on board in sealed containers and then housed below deck, that it's entirely possible that the US Navy also has some classified weapon systems stored in VLS launch systems. We just wouldn't know about it. In no particular order, we have the RIM-66 Standard Missile 2, or SM-2, which is a medium-range surface-to-air missile used for air defense, followed by the RIM-156A Standard Missile 2 Block 4. This is an extended-range surface-to-air missile interceptor that's modified for terminal-phase ballistic missile defense. Then we have the RIM-174 Standard Missile 6, or SM-6, which is an extended-range surface-to-air missile that can also be used for anti-ship and terminal ballistic missile defense roles. We have the RIM-161 Standard Missile 3, or SM-3, which is a ballistic missile defense interceptor meant for engaging short to intermediate range ballistic missiles. Up next is the RIM-162 Evolved Sea Sparrow Missile, or ESSM. This is a short to medium-range surface-to-air missile designed specifically to counter supersonic maneuvering anti-ship missiles. Then, of course, we have the BGM-109 Tomahawk land attack cruise missile, America's preferred form of kinetic diplomacy, followed by the RUM-139 VL ASROC, or Vertical Launch Anti-Submarine Rocket. Now, this is, in my opinion, one of the more interesting weapons leveraged by these vertical launch systems. It is a surface ship-launched anti-submarine missile that uses a conventional rocket booster to deliver either a Mark 46 Mod 5A or a Mark 54 Mod lightweight torpedo to an entry point on the surface of the ocean that's close to a targeted submarine for anti-submarine warfare. And there are a bunch of other weapons that either already are or soon may be carried inside these vertical launch system modules, including both the Joint Strike Missile and the AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missile, both of which started out as air-launched weapons, but are currently being modified to be launched from these vertical launch systems. But I also want to be clear that I found a few official sources with contradictory information about some of the weapons that can be carried in these Mark Mark 41 cells. Now, when it comes to air power related stuff, I can usually discern between which of the official sources is more accurate, but I'm still learning naval systems, so if you work with these platforms and notice that I got something wrong, please make sure to let me know in the comments below. Now, the first vessels equipped with these vertical launch systems were Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruisers, starting with the USS Bunker Hill in 1986. These larger surface combatants were designed to support command and control operations as carrier strike group flagships, while also accommodating 8 VLS modules in both forward and aft compartments, each of which house 61 individual cells for a total of 122. The systems proved so useful that they soon became the centerpiece weapon platform for the new Arleigh Burke-class destroyers that followed, with early Flight 1 and 2 Burkes equipped with a forward 29-cell and aft 61-cell system for a total of 90, and later Flight 2A and Flight 3 Burkes increasing the forward module to 32 cells and the rear to 64 for a total of 96. Now again, each of these cells houses a single waterproof container that usually carries just one weapon inside, but could potentially carry as many as 4 if we're talking evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, meaning a single Ticonderoga-class cruiser could head into the fight with as few as 122 VLS weapons on board, and hypothetically as many as 488, but that's if you equipped it strictly with evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, which wouldn't make much sense. The most modern Flight 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers can head into the fight with as few as 96 VLS missiles on board, and hypothetically as many as 384, but again, only if illogically equipped with only evolved Sea Sparrow missiles. Now, the hardware and software associated with these systems have seen consistent updates and upgrades since initial fielding, but not all of the changes made have increased capability. Early Mark 41 VLS designs actually came with a collapsible strike-down crane that would allow the crew on board to remove spent canisters and replace them with new ones, making it possible to rearm a VLS-equipped warship at sea. But the system proved not only difficult to work with at sea, but also completely unable to manage larger weapons like Tomahawk cruise missiles and ballistic missile interceptors. So the Navy not only removed the strike-down crane from the design of future warships, it went back and took them out of the ships that already had them installed. As a result, despite the incredible capability provided by the Mark 41 system, both cruisers and destroyers effectively became single-magazine weapon platforms, capable of carrying out missions using a wide variety of munitions on board, but forced to return to properly equipped ports to be rearmed when they're done. And we're getting a glimpse into why this could be such a problem right now in the Red Sea, where Yemen-based Houthi rebels are continuing to launch drone and missile attacks against commercial vessels transiting the waterway. Right now, there are 5 warships participating in the US-led Operation Prosperity Guardian, aiming to shoot down these drones and missiles before they can find their targets. And by mid-February, the US Navy had already reported that they'd used up some 100 surface-to-air missiles already. Now, aside from pertinent discussions about the costs of these interceptors, estimated to be around $4 million apiece, versus the cost of the drones and missiles they're shooting down, it's also worth noting that if, hypothetically, all 5 of the vessels participating were Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the US would have already expended about 1/5 of its combat power in theater by mid-February, and if for some reason all of those interceptors had been launched from one ship, it would need to rotate out to be rearmed, either reducing the amount of geographical air defense coverage these ships can provide, or forcing another vessel to step in to take its place. But bad as that may sound, let's take a step back and relook at that 2019 study we discussed before from the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments that estimated that if the US found itself in a fight with China, it would expend 360 vertical launch cells per day. That's the equivalent of expending every VLS weapon on board nearly 4 destroyers, or about 3 cruisers, every day, forcing these vessels to rotate out of the fight, sail weeks away to be rearmed, and then sail weeks back. And it actually gets even worse from there, because those friendly ports would very rapidly become targets. Now, the US Navy has been resupplying warships at sea since the end of the 19th century, with vessels receiving coal deliveries while underway to limit the predictability of their port stops at the time. Today, that effort has expanded into the Navy's Military Sealift Command, which boasts a fleet of some 130 vessels to date and includes ships that specialize in delivering fuel, along with just about anything and everything else an operating vessel might need to stay in the fight. Everything, that is, except for more weapons for the vertical launch systems in cruisers and destroyers. In order to rearm them, US Navy ships need to travel back to specific ports in Japan, Guam, Hawaii, and California. And even once they arrive, the delicate process of removing spent cells and replacing them with new ones with painstakingly tight tolerances can take as long as 2 or even 3 full days. Now, this really complicates matters for military planners who need to find a way to maintain sufficient fighting capacity in theater while rotating these ships in and out, but it also paints a huge target on any friendly port that's equipped to do this job. And as retired U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander Tom Granger explained in a piece he wrote for the U.S. Naval Institute in 2018, a well-equipped adversary like China would be entirely capable of taking out local ports that are equipped to do this job, forcing American warships to sail all the way back to Hawaii or maybe even California to be rearmed. A round trip that could take a combined 4 to 6 weeks, not even counting the few additional days required for the actual rearming. Alright, I feel as though I've probably convinced you by now that this is a problem, so what's the Navy doing to address it? Well, in February of 2023, Carlos Del Toro, the Secretary of the Navy, once again reaffirmed the force's ongoing efforts to rearm surface combatants without the need for a lengthy retreat from the fight. I'll quote him here. Winning will require keeping our assets in the fight. Rearming our warships' vertical launch tubes at sea is amongst the clearest examples of sustaining capacity and increased persistent combat power from our current force. And to be clear, it certainly looks as though Del Toro has put the Navy's money where his mouth is. There are multiple ongoing efforts to resolve this issue, though most of the publicly disclosed ones, or at least the ones we can get a good look at, appear to be baby steps. And if I'm honest, that makes some sense. It might seem like a simple problem to solve, just lowering these new canisters into holes on the deck of a ship, but the truth is, it's a fair bit more complex than that, even on a well-equipped pier. Replacing spent VLS cells requires hoisting a 3,000 plus pound, 25 plus foot canister from a horizontal position up into a vertical one, and then positioning it properly over a hole designed to accommodate the exact size of the canister with practically no additional tolerances, before lowering it into position, which is all challenging enough before you consider the fact that the canister is housing a combination of rocket fuel and high explosives. And this process becomes exponentially more dangerous when being done across ships tethered together while underway at sea and in the midst of a fight. So the first baby step the Navy took toward solving this problem is to equip vessels to do this job, but not with the intent of doing so while underway. Instead, these properly equipped vessels could turn any friendly port into a rearming station. The premise is to tie the resupply ship to a stationary pier, then have the cruiser or destroyer pull up alongside it and be secured in place with bumpers separating the vessels. From there, the delicate work of lifting and then lowering VLS cells into their respective modules can be done in very calm and controlled circumstances. Now, this approach was demonstrated aboard the USS Spruance destroyer while tied to the pier at Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego back in September of 2022. They were using an offshore support vessel contracted to the US Navy's Military Sealift Command called Ocean Valor, and the exercise was a success. But a subsequent effort to do the same thing while anchored in the calm waters of a harbor 1 month later was met with failure. Now, the Ocean Valor was equipped with a dynamic positioning system that controls both ship speed and steering, in order to keep it properly positioned about 90 feet away from the destroyer and at the right angle. And that system, according to Captain Kendall Bridgewater, the Commodore of Military Sealift Command Pacific, functioned so well that he doesn't even think keeping bumpers in place, which are meant to protect the ships in the event of a collision, would even be necessary moving forward. But despite the two ships holding their proper positions, the rocking sea and wind made the missile canisters, which were inert for this test, sway in a way that was entirely unsafe for the destroyer's personnel to approach them to guide them into the launch module. This program proved that the Navy can rearm ships in more ports than ever, but still serves as only the initial step toward resolving this vulnerability. In the long term, the Navy wants to be able to rearm these cells underway, sailing side by side with the resupply ship at speeds of around 12 knots, or a bit shy of 14 miles per hour, just as they do in standard resupply operations. Now, this not only creates challenges regarding ship positioning, but also the ability to break away from one another rapidly in the event of an inbound attack. And these are both challenges engineers within the Office of Naval Research continue to contend with today. And in fact, there are already multiple new crane systems in development or testing that are more specialized than the general purpose one aboard the Ocean Valor. The US Navy announced another successful demonstration of a similar but different pierside rearming capability using a different type of crane and the USS Porter destroyer, tied skin to skin, as they call it, with the USNS William McLean dry cargo ship in August of 2023, proving that the Navy, at the very least, now has more than one method of resolving this problem inside friendly ports. And there are a handful of other possibilities, some of which I discuss at a bit more length in my full write-up on this topic that you can find on Sandboxx News. But the most promising one, the Transferable Rearming Mechanism, or TRAM, is actually slated to conduct its first at-sea demonstration in just the next few months. Now, this system was developed in-house by the Naval Surface Warfare Center Port Hueneme Division using a 1996 proposal penned by former Army warrant officer turned Marine engineer Marvin Miller as its basis. Now, this design, which includes the use of an articulating crane that can lift and rotate canisters into the proper vertical position, was considered technologically infeasible in the mid-90s when he wrote about it. But the Navy now seems confident that they can make it work using the technology of today. Now, sea state conditions are generally measured using the Beaufort scale, devised all the way back in 1805 by later Royal Navy Rear Admiral Francis Beaufort. And if the Navy's new approach to Miller's concept works as advertised, underway rearming of VLS cells should be possible not just at sea states of 0 like they are right now, in other words, 0 wind speed and 0 wave height, but rather all the way up to sea states of 5, meaning 17 to 21 knot winds and waves that are 6 to 8 feet tall. That is a huge difference. Now, we know that new Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Lisa Franchetti observed the TRAM system in a demonstration this past December and was very impressed with what she saw. We also know that there's supposed to be an at-sea demonstration of this system sometime in the summer of 2024, but to date, no further details have been released. But if this system does do what the Navy aims to have it do, the long-term implications of being able to rearm surface ships at sea while underway are difficult to overstate. According to that same Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments analysis that we discussed earlier, as few as just 2 or 3 resupply ships that could do that job would have the same impact as fielding a whopping 18 additional cruisers and destroyers in theater simply by eliminating the need for lengthy trips back and forth to friendly ports. And according to that same report, this at-sea rearming capability would then provide the equivalent combatant value of some $11 to $37 billion, making this a very high return investment for the Navy. And Navy Secretary Carlos Del Toro is also on board with the TRAM program, saying that this capability will, quote, herald nothing short of a revolution in naval surface warfare logistics. He went on to call it a game-changing capability that will be operational within 2 to 3 years and will make our surface navy more formidable, serving as a powerful maritime deterrent. And this serves as an important reminder that while we place a great deal of our focus on emerging technologies that could have entirely new battlefield effects, in reality, the most effective technology-based programs are often focused not on fielding new systems or platforms at all, but rather on increasing the effectiveness or the efficiency of existing weapon systems. Fielding entirely new fleets of warships that are purpose-built to be rearmed underway, alongside entirely new fleets of resupply ships designed with that distinct purpose in mind, would surely be the most effective solution to the Navy's rearmament problem. But that kind of a solution isn't practical for budgetary or timeline reasons. Fielding a relatively low-cost method of rearming the Navy's existing warships using existing resupply vessels may not be as sexy as a new stealth fighter or a new aircraft carrier, but it can be done fast and cheap while delivering immense battlefield effects. And when it comes to deterring, or in a worst-case scenario, winning a large-scale fight, that's the sort of technological breakthrough that just may make all the difference. And with that ends this edition of Sea Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and motivation from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And sincere thanks to everyone who reached out about my eye surgery. I've got it scheduled for 3 weeks out, so I'll be reading with both eyes again in no time. So don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you don't miss a drop from Sandboxx News.